This presentation is a broad overview of the United States in World War II. Cause of the war were the failure of the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations and their several problems, the signing of the Munich Agreement, the political values between the United States, Germany, and Japan, and the USA's neutrality and the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Treaty of Versailles was created on June 28, 1919, after World War I. It was signed between Germany and the Allied powers. The treaty required Germany to accept responsibility of the war and also made Germany disarm, pay reparations to countries forming the Entente Powers, and make substantial territorial concessions. Germany starts violating the treaty by rebuilding the armed forces in 1935. By March 1935, Adolf Hitler created a new navy and air force and the first full armored divisions. A year later, Hitler violated the treaty again by reoccupying Rhineland, which was a demilitarized zone. In March of 1938, Hitler annexed Austria, and then in September of the same year, he annexed Sudetenland. By March 1939, Hitler occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. Finally, on September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. This picture here shows Nazi soldiers evacuating Polish civilians out of their country. The League of Nations was founded in 1919 to 1920. This would be the beginning of the United Nations. The goals of the League were to prevent war by using a collective security, disarmament, and settling disputes with negotiation and arbitration. The League had similar troubles with the Treaty of Versailles in keeping countries demilitarized. The League was to design a disarmament plan. The treaty reflected on the League of Nations, so that every time the treaty was not followed, the League would lose support. Japan and Germany withdrew from the League in 1933, and Italy withdrew in 1937. They saw the many flaws in the League of Nations. The U.S. refused to join the League. This limited the success of the organization because the U.S. was one of the most powerful countries. The Munich Agreement was signed on September 29, 1938 in Munich, Germany. The agreement was a permit for Nazi Germany to annex Sudetenland. Sudetenland's importance was because it bordered almost all of Czechoslovakia, making the country very vulnerable. Here shows government officials from Nazi Germany, France, Britain, and Italy meeting in Munich. The political values and the differences between USA and Germany and Japan. The United States had a form of representative democracy, which they still have today, which the federal government and the state government working together. However, Nazi Germany referred to themselves as National Socialists. This was a form of fascism that involved anti-Semitism and biological racism. Nazism was a far right-wing group. They viewed Jews as their greatest threat and rejected liberalism, democracy, and Marxism. Also, with Japan, their government was absolute constitutional monarchy. Japan had a large amount of industrialization and militarization. They wanted to expand its control over the Asia-Pacific regions, so they did this by invading surrounding countries for more land, which we'll later see that the USA was not alright with any of their actions. United States neutrality. The Neutrality Act of 1937 kept the United States out of World War II and also stated that the U.S. cannot trade with any belligerent states. Japan invaded Manchuria, causing Roosevelt to shut off trade with Japan. The Japanese were aggravated with the U.S. and viewed them as Japan's largest threat in the Pacific. In Europe, the increasing defeat of France and the bad conditions of Britain led the U.S. to accelerate defense preparations. Pearl Harbor. It was a naval base in Hawaii and was viewed as the largest threat to Japan in their aggressive activity in the Pacific. Pearl Harbor had the largest stockpile of U.S. naval ships and air bases in the Pacific. The Japanese unleashed a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The next day, December 8, 1941, the United States of America enters World War II. Here shows the sinking of USS Arizona, which was a battleship stationed at Pearl Harbor the day of the bombing. We're moving on to the military involvement in all three parts of World War II, starting with military involvement in Africa. The Allies in Africa were Britain, US, and some French soldiers. The Axis consisted of Germany and Italy. Operation Torch's objectives were to relieve pressure on the Russians, gain French Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia to try and enlist colonies to join the war, assist Britain in destroying the Axis, open up Mediterranean to Allied ships, shorten the Allied route to Europe, and prepare Allies for further operations. Major areas of fighting in Africa were the two landings in the Strait of Gibraltar and Strait of Algeria, Tunisia, Casablanca, and Cape Bon Peninsula were other areas of major battles. The military leaders in Africa were General Eisenhower, who commanded the invasion forces. Major General George S. Patton led the 1st Armored Corps, and Major General Lloyd W. Fredendall commanded the U.S. 2nd Corps. German and Italians ended up surrendering on May 12, 1943. This picture shows U.S. soldiers landing in the Strait of Gibraltar. The military involvement in Europe. Allies gathered in Britain to launch the largest amphibious attack on the European coast. D-Day was June 6, 1944. This was the start of America's Operation Overlord. The U.S. had a large buildup of men and supplies in the beachhead in northern France. U.S. plans were to have Britain lure the German armor towards the British sector as the United States continued attacking areas around St. Lo. General Patton's U.S. Third Army secured well-needed ports to help the United States build up their military in Europe. The United States planned to gain ground inland in order to set up air and supply bases. Allies planned to move into Germany on a broad front. Operation Dragoon was set up in southern France. The United States invaded the Mediterranean shores of France with the objective to stop the reinforcement of German forces to Normandy and provide a line of communications through ports for the Allies. Strong U.S. leaders in Europe were General Patton and his U.S. Third Army that gained the ports, General Bradley's U.S. First Army, and later combining the First and Third Armies to have the 12th Army Group that pushed south of Ardennes, and St. General Alexander Patch's U.S. 7th Army that invaded the Mediterranean. VE Day was declared on May 8, 1945. This is meaning the victory in Europe. The picture shows American soldiers landing on the northern France's beaches on D-Day. Military involvement in the Pacific. U.S. joined the war in retaliation to Pearl Harbor. U.S. Navy battles introduced excuse me, the the United States Navy battles introduced the way of carrier battles. Battles at the Coral Sea and the battles of Midway sparked the turning point for the Pacific. Marines landed on Guadalcanal and in Solomon, and their tactic was using island hopping in the Solomon Islands to defeat Japanese stations all over the area. This strategy allowed for the United States to strike the enemy's weak points. Marines also advanced in the Central Pacific with the defeat of Tarawa. Admiral Nimitz led the Navy conquest, and General MacArthur controlled the Army involvement in the Pacific. They succeeded by using carrier battles and island hopping to their advantage. VJ Day was declared on September 2, 1945, meaning victory in Japan. The picture shows pilots on a carrier in the Pacific. The main causes of victory for the Allied powers were the battle strategies, which were the Axis swarming Germany from all sides and cutting off reinforcement routes in Europe. In the Pacific, the ability to gain many islands was important for the advances of the Navy. The fall of Hitler and Mussolini consisted of Hitler committing suicide after the Soviets reached Berlin, and the Italian partisans killed Mussolini during his attempt to escape to Switzerland. Japan planned badly for the Pacific War. Their military was too spread out and they did not have enough supplies. This enabled America to attack with a large force and destroy their many spread out units. The United States started relying more on tanks, paratroopers, the advance of or the strategy of island hopping and carriers in the Pacific that helped them win the war. The diplomatic views. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the 32nd president, who was also president during all of World War II. He wanted to expand and re-equip the Navy and Army. The United States diplomatic missions were with exiled governments in Europe. The aim was to keep a good alliance for help in overthrowing the Axis. Wartime diplomacy set up the Yalta Conference that was held between February 4th and 11th in 1945. Heads of U.S., Great Britain, and Soviet Union met to discuss the re-establishment of the nations of Europe that were in shambles. They also decided to split up Germany into 4 zones. Germany was also once again demilitarized. Technology advancement after the war and during the war. Excuse me. Large weaponry advancements were the new jet fighters and common use of war bombers. Many tanks being used because they had stronger armor and great firepower. One example of this is the Germans' Panzer Division, which was one of the most feared armored divisions throughout the whole entire war. Naval warfare surrounded itself with aircraft carriers and submarines, which was very reliable because aircraft carriers could send out many mass attacks of jet fighters and war bombers, and submarines could go undersea and destroy enemy ships without being detected. The advances in communication and intel were one example would be radar and sonar, because it became important discoveries during the war, allowing for the U.S. to detect enemy planes and ships before they could reach their designated targets. Code breaking and ballistics tables brought out the need for the development of electronic computer technology. Semi-automatic